Got a Pontiac G6 here. It's a 2008. This car is getting 2 front wheel bearings, front rotors, front pads, and 2 front calipers. Now, I wasn't the one who told the owner that it needs all these parts. In fact, I didn't even look at the car. We talked over the phone, and he told me what the car needed over the phone. And I told him, well, bring it over. I'll look the car over, and we'll see what it needs. And he was like, no, I'm pretty sure it needs this, it needs that, it needs that. All right, well, you know, the funny thing is, I took it out for a test drive, and I'm not seeing or hearing any of those noises that he's talking about. But I could hear the car has plenty of other noises. So I could tell it has like bad stabilizer links and bushings, probably bad tie rods, blown out struts for sure. So the front end's making all kind of noise. And we don't have any of those parts. Why? Because the owner was sure on what it needs, and he's the one telling the guy what the car needs. So here's the thing. The car sounded like crap driving around because of all the bad parts I just mentioned. So we're going to go ahead and change the brakes on this thing. Change the calipers. Change the wheel bearings. And this car's going to drive the same exact way it came in. And you know what? It's not my fault. He didn't want to bring it over for me to look at. And he said he knew what was wrong with the car already. So that's where we're at. Now it's funny because the guy's like, oh, it needs a caliper. I told him why. He said it feels like the front driver's side is locking up. And there's a loud humming noise coming the faster I drive. I told him, well, that's usually indicative of a bad wheel bearing. He goes, yeah, I know one of the wheel bearings is bad. But the calipers, they feel like they're locking up. I told him, all right. And then he's like, yeah, so we might as well change both of the front calipers. Okay, and I told him, well, what about the wheel bearing? Does it sound like the front left, front right? Oh, it might be both of them, so let's just change both. Which honestly, I'm not complaining. I know it sounds like I'm talking shit and I'm complaining, but I'm not. I'm working. I'm getting paid for what I'm doing, okay? But the thing is, I have a feeling after all this money the owner spent on parts and labor, that he's not going to be happy with the outcome because the real issues with the front suspension have not been taken care of. Alright, so on this side we have a little bit of play in the tie rods. The stabilizer links are worn out and loose. Like I said, it's making a ton of noise, just as I suspected. Let's come on this side, check out this wheel. Look at that. It's tie rods on this side. And I'm sure the stabilizer links also on this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the owner right now and ask him if he could drop off some stabilizer links and some tie rods from AutoZone, I suppose. And let's see if I could get this work done, because if I'm going to be in here doing all this work, you know what, you might as well spend a little bit more money and get everything done right, and at least be happy with the way your car turned out after you dumped all this money into it. Because if he does not change these tie rods or these stabilizer links, he's gonna drive away with this car exactly the same. And you know what? I see no signs of these calipers being locked up or locking up. I drove it around for a little while. As far as the brakes, couldn't feel an issue with calipers locking up. So yeah, this guy, it would have been in his best interest to let me look at the car first. I could have saved him a ton of money on what actually needs to be done versus just throwing parts at the car. Alright, so I just texted the owner, let him know about the tie rods and the stabilizer links, and I'm gonna see if he wants to get it all done. Don't know yet. So all this coming off, it's getting new calipers, so I'm just taking the caliper off of the bracket just so I can move it out of the way for now, and get to the bracket itself. Alright, so put that on backwards. Very smart of me. Go ahead and just set this aside. See, the brake pads look really full. They're not that old, okay? The rotors are rusty, but again, I don't see any signs of these calipers locking up. So let's go ahead and zip off this caliper bracket. So I just heard back from the owner. and he's gonna go to AutoZone and bring me the parts. So we got the job of doing the stabilizer links and the outer tie rods at least, because that's where all the play's at. One thing I noticed is, because I've been watching some YouTube videos on this, and I just noticed, I don't know where I am in camera, but I just noticed that my fittings for my air tools are all 1/4 inch, and I'm using a 3/8 line. So talk about a bottleneck, right? Yeah, so I've been watching YouTube videos on air fittings and air tools in general, and that's what made me look at this. So it's time for me to get the appropriate size fittings for my air tools, because yeah, talk about losing power right there, right? Come on. All right, so let's see if we could zip these off of here. Yeah, that Nano Onyx Impact, that thing is fantastic. The one thing I don't like about it is, of course, the airline. You know, who does? But besides that, it's compact sized and its power, I absolutely love it. So here's the inside of the rotor. Here's the outside. Yep, just typical stuff, nothing crazy. So you can see how all of my impact sockets are nice and shiny. It's because just yesterday I came out here and I noticed all my impact sockets, for some reason, these inside of this case right here were completely covered in rust. Anyone who saw my previous video knows that I get a lot of humidity in here, and during the winter, and then it starts to warm up again, all of my tools are just covered in droplets of water. So I had to come at each and every socket with a rag and clean off as much rust as I can, and then I put some used oil on all of them, and that's why they look so shiny. So I'm just gonna have to keep an eye on it, and I kind of do that for all of my sockets as the year goes by. Just kind of keep them oiled up. It sucks, but whatever. All right, so for the axle nut, I'm just gonna use the Milwaukee high torque gun just to zip it off as fast as possible. Go ahead and give it some penetrating fluid. Threads are looking pretty crusty. Don't know what size this is. It's 35 mil. And there you go, quick action. Nope, that's stuck. Let me get the air hammer. All right, so you can see I'm using a pointed chisel here, chisel bit. I don't know what the hell to call it. See if we can knock this out. No issue at all. All right, so far everything's looking pretty good. So I'm going to, let's see, what am I going to do next? Since we're going to be replacing the outer tie rod, I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect the outer tie rod right now. Especially, it gives me the free movement of the knuckle, and I can move it back and forth without having to turn the steering wheel. So that'll be nice. So let me knock out the outer tie rod. All right, so this one has no cotter pin. Damn you. The whole ball joint started spinning right at the very end. All right, let me see what I can do. All right, so this tie rod has a 8 mil head on it, so you can just grab the shaft with that. So I'm gonna try that first. Oh, she's tight. Oh, I can't even get it to move. Right at the very end too. Let me see if I can maybe put the impact gun on it, 3/8, and run it in. Nope. Alright guys, we need some heat. Let me get out the mini ductor. So let's unplug the speed sensor for the wheel bearing. Pops right out of there. Okay. So that's all disconnected. We should have plenty of access to the 3 bolts holding in the wheel bearing from the back of the knuckle. Let's see if the Nano can take off the wheel bearing bolts. I am using a extension just because it's a little difficult to get inside of there. Sometimes it helps to have something pressed right here on the CV shaft, and it pushes it back and gives you a little bit more clearance. You could actually use the tool for the slide hammer and it'll press on the CV shaft. So let's see if we can get this out of here. Alright, so it did come out. I just had a little bit of interference with the CV shaft, so I had to run it back in a little bit, but it did come out. So I'm not worried about it. Let's turn on this side and try to get these out of the way. Let's see if we could get these bolts out of here. All right, running low on air pressure. Let me go turn on the tank. All right, so I got one of them out completely, and the other 2, they're already loose, so I'm just gonna use a smaller tool to get inside of there and remove them. So now that all of the bolts are off of the wheel bearing, let's go ahead and use this to knock it out. Hopefully it comes out with this tool. If it does, that'll be pretty sweet because it'll save us a ton of time. And no, I'm not using the lug nuts that came with the car. When you buy this tool, it comes with little bags full of different types of nuts, so you can use for this without damaging the lug nuts. You can see how that tool saves a ton of time. So we'll go ahead, pop out the remaining piece of this wheel bearing that's just stuck back here. Pretty easy piece to pop out. And we'll clean up all the surface right here and get it ready for the new wheel bearing. Yes, it really does matter which way you hit it. It has to come out the front. All right, so here's the piece I was talking about. Get that out the way, and now we can go ahead and clean up this face right here of where the wheel bearing is gonna go. You can see all the corrosion right here. Let's see how well something like this works. Not as much as I want it to work, so let's try something else. So let's take care of the inside first. I like to use this bit right here on the die grinder. You can just see it's like a little, I don't know what the hell it is, maybe like a carbide bit or something, but you can see it's pretty flat. And the longer the better, so you could just get in here. And you can see all the crap that's kicking out of how well this thing works. And you're just gonna have to move the CV shaft around. That was stupid of me. I thought it was brake parts cleaner. All right, so here I got the actual brake parts cleaner. All right, at this point, I'm gonna grab the new wheel bearing. Let's test fit it, make sure it goes in nice and smooth. If it does, we'll pull it back off and spray this face right here with some CRC to protect it. and then we'll continue with installing it. All right, I can live with that. It goes in pretty smooth. Don't got to fight with it too much. That means we got the majority of the corrosion off of it. The face actually looks pretty good and inside of the bore. So I'm happy with that. Let's go ahead and pull this off once again. Being careful with the sensor. And like I said, let's spray this down with some CRC now. Looks pretty good to me. Let's not forget about our little shield right here. The shield itself actually looks pretty clean, so I'm not worried about it. Usually I have to clean big chunks of rust off of it, but this one looks like it's in pretty good shape. So this one's gonna sit just like this. And I've already grabbed the 3 bolts for the wheel bearing, and I put a little bit of blue thread locker in all 3 of them. You know what? Let me spray the back side of the wheel bearing real fast. So I'm just gonna spray this face. There we go. All right, let's grab one of our bolts. All right, so I got the first bolt started on the threads already. Try to flip this around and get to the other side. Do this one in the corner. All right, so that one started. I could barely reach that one. So let me go ahead and get all of these bolts torqued down, and then we can move on from this. Before we go ahead and finish putting the brakes together, I think we'll have a better, or just a little bit easier time trying to get the stabilizer links off if the rotor and the caliper isn't in the way. So let's spray this penetrating fluid on. That doesn't really do anything right now, but I guess it makes someone feel better. I cannot believe this. This actually came off all the way. Witchcraft, that's what this is. Things never come off. Okay, so the top one isn't loose, but the bottom ball joint is where I feel all the play. Hopefully you guys can hear that. Hopefully the bottom nut comes off just as easy as the top one. You guys are not gonna believe this, but the bottom one is coming out too. I mean, I still gotta hold the backside with a wrench, but the fact that it's coming off is amazing. And I know someone's gonna say it in the comment section, oh, it's because of penetrating fluid. You know what, go kick rocks, because penetrating fluid doesn't do shit, okay? It only works once the bolt or the nut is already moving. Then yeah, it does help. But if something is completely seized and doesn't want to budge, it's not doing anything. It doesn't penetrate. So yeah, if you're saying it's the penetrating fluid, go pound sand. Completely loose. I know it looks bent, but that's because I bent it. I was trying to pop it out of its socket, but it just wasn't going. But yeah, this bottom one is completely toast. All right, so I plugged in the wheel speed sensor already, and that's sitting back on its bracket. Before I pop on the new rotor, let's go ahead and spray the hub with the CRC. And let's go get our new rotor. Perfect, like a glove. Here's our new caliper. It looks like it matches up to the old one. Just give it a quick test fit here. Okay, so it seems to fit the rotor, and this looks like it's the right one, because when I was ordering the parts online, I wasn't sure. I think they had 2 different options. So yeah, this is the right one. Or actually, the bleed valve is over here on the bottom, so technically this is the wrong one, but it is the right caliper. We need the left caliper. This is the correct caliper for this side of the car. Now, whenever I get new calipers, I like to check the slide pins, because I just feel like they never come with enough grease on them. And look at this right here. I know it's not going to pick up on camera, but this is almost as good as dry. There's a hint of grease, but it's barely even noticeable. So I just like to add a little bit extra. You don't have to go crazy with this stuff. A smidge of more grease on this side, but nothing crazy. A little bit of extra grease never hurt anyone. Before I put the hardware kit on the bracket, I like to spray again some more CRC just to protect from corrosion building up underneath the hardware kit. Now, the owner supplied his own brake pads because he said the original ones are still under warranty. I'm not surprised to find that they are the cheap AutoZone pads, so we have no hardware kit included. So it's a nice thing that the new brake caliper comes with its own hardware, and that popped on absolutely perfect. It's good. The pads should slide in with no issues at all. Let's go ahead and put this bracket on the car. It looks like I ran into a little bit of an issue with the new caliper bracket on it. This side, or the front side of the rotor, was rubbing against the hardware kit, and if you look directly down the center, the rotor was, instead of being centered inside of the bracket, it was pushed to the front, or the bracket was pushed to the back, whichever way you want to look at it. Basically, the new caliper bracket is not going to fit, and I thought it was an issue with the wheel bearing, seeing that we just did the wheel bearing, and if it's not in the right place, it could decide where this rotor is going to sit, whether it's too far forward, too far back, you know, for whatever reason. So I was ready to yank this wheel bearing out of here once again, but for the sake of just checking it, I decided to put on the old bracket, and the rotor sits perfectly center inside the bracket, and it's no longer rubbing on the rotor. So I don't know what's going on with this bracket. Of course, these things aren't new, they're remanufactured. So who knows, this thing probably came off of a car that got into an accident, or for some reason this thing got bent, and you know, they just clean them up, repaint them, and sell them again. So I don't know what's going on here, but it's definitely not right. All right, so let me show you guys what I'm talking about. Put some light down here, and we look straight up from the rotor. You can see there's light coming through. Right there's a pretty big gap there, and the same thing on the back side, and the gap looks to be even, right? So it's not touching the bracket. So let me go ahead and pop on the new bracket, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I got the new bracket installed. Let's look down the front right here. You can see there is not much of a gap, and in fact the hardware kit is making contact with the rotor, and it's not the rotor loose, because as you can see I got two lug nuts holding it in place. It's nice and snug. It's pressed up against the wheel bearing, but there isn't much of a gap here, not like on the original bracket. And if we look at the back side, we have a very large gap. So I hope all of that makes sense. And I did not move anything besides the brake caliper. You can see we just don't have much of a gap here. And if I turn the rotor by hand, you can see where the brake hardware kit is making contact with the rotor. You can see it's starting to add a groove right there into the rotor. So yeah, this has to come off. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to reuse the original caliper bracket, and hopefully we could still use the new caliper. Okay, so I cleaned all the rust off of the old caliper bracket, sprayed it with some CRC, put the new hardware kit on it, and I even took the new boots and the slide pins off of the new brake caliper bracket and put them on here. So pretty much we have everything new, and everything fit nicely, so it's not going to be an issue. The biggest eyesore is how rusty it looks, but it functions, and the rotor is now centered perfectly inside of the bracket, so that's the only thing that matters. Let's go ahead and put these cheap ass AutoZone brake pads on. Get in the zone, AutoZone. You can tell when all the rust is cleaned up nicely, because the pads just kind of slide in just like that. No issues, nothing, no having to hammer pads on. Got the new caliper in place. It's all torqued down nice and tight. Make sure to put a little bit of grease right here on the two tabs where they make contact with the brake pad, and as well as the piston that pushes on the inside brake pad. Put a little bit of grease on them just to try to minimize any noise that it might try to make in the future. At this point, I'm just gonna go ahead, disconnect. Let's see if you guys can see. Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna go ahead and disconnect the brake line from the old caliper and bolt it up to the new one. We have a new bolt and two new cross washers for it. So remember, you should get two cross washers off of this thing. So one is still on the bolts, and the other cross washer is stuck on the hose, and there it goes right there. Make sure you remove both of them. Doesn't hurt to give this thing a spray of some brake parts cleaner. Just kind of spraying both sides here. So I now have the brake hose going to the caliper, and it's all snug down. We don't have a leak or anything like that. So now I can just remove this caliper from back here. And what I'm going to do now is open up the bleed valve on the new caliper and see if we could get brake fluid coming out of it to start the bleeding process. So as you can see, we now have brake fluid coming out of that bleed valve. So I'm just gonna go ahead and close it. And I find that that alone does like 90% of the bleeding right there. All right, so we have a pretty good pedal already without doing any bleeding at all. Like I said, that method of letting the fluid come out of the bleed valve before you do anything takes care of like 90% of everything. So the pedal actually feels pretty good. But for the sake of doing it the right way, I'm gonna go ahead and bleed the brakes the way they should be bled, just to make sure we are 100%. But I'm not going to do that right now. I'm gonna wait until I put the other caliper on the front right side, and once I have both of the calipers on, that's when I'll start the bleeding process. Since I'm still waiting on the parts from the owner, let's go ahead and knock loose the outer tie rod. I'm not gonna completely remove it. I just want to loosen the jam nut. All right. And nice. Okay, so as you can see, the outer tie rod spins freely and we're going to be able to remove it. Okay, so we have a little bit of change of plans. The owner can't get out here. It turns out he doesn't have a ride, and Uber wants like $75 round trip, which is absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, he's not going to come out here. And then I was going to offer to go to AutoZone for him and get the parts, until I looked on AutoZone's website. AutoZone wants $50 for pretty much each part. So with taxes and everything, he's over $200 for 2 outer tie rods and 2 stabilizer links, which is absolutely crazy. I wouldn't even pay those prices. So I told him, you know what, let me look online real fast. Rock Auto found some good quality parts for like half price. Okay, maybe like 110, something like that. So that's the route we're gonna go. We're gonna order the parts online and screw AutoZone, because that's way too much money for those freaking parts. And as for all of this, the stabilizer link on this side is just going to stay off. It's not a big issue. The other stabilizer link on the front right side is still connected, so the sway bar is still going to move with the suspension. It's not going to be an issue at all, especially just for a few days of driving until he brings the car back once we get the parts in. As far as the outer tie rod, I'm just going to go ahead, tighten down that jam nut, and then tighten the outer tie rod on knuckle. It should be all set. I'm going to go ahead and put the axle nut on right here and torque this down to spec. So it's the next morning. I got this Pontiac put back together and it's ready to go out for its first test drive. As far as the brake caliper bracket on the front right side, it was a no-go. In fact, the caliper bracket on this side was actually worse than the driver's side. It was just really close, and what was touching was the hardware kit, okay? But on this one, the bracket itself was like hard up against the rotor. There was like, the rotor barely even wanted to spin. I don't know what's going on with these parts. Okay, so test driving the Pontiac G6, the brakes feel absolutely great. There's a nice firm pressure coming from the pedal, and I did bleed out the brake system like I said I was gonna do, and it got topped off with new brake fluid. There's no weird noises. The brakes feel great. As far as the wheel bearing, the front left side, when I took that one off, I tried spinning it by hand and it really didn't want to spin. That thing was pretty stiff. So I can already tell that replacing that front left wheel bearing did make a difference. It's driving a lot quieter at, you know, when you get up to speed. So it definitely does not sound like we have a bad wheel bearing anymore. So thanks for watching and coming along. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.